what are the conditions that are likely to occur worldwide as climate changes, how might they affect America's national security, and what should we as a nation do at a very high level without getting into specifics. So as I said, we addressed these issues by forming the 4-star Military Advisory Board. And here I actually wish I would have brought one PowerPoint to show you a list of the 12 members. But it was an extremely senior respected group. They were a pleasure to work with. We had, and I'll just mention a couple of them to illustrate the groups, the types of people we had. We had, for example, General Tony Zinni, a retired Marine Corps 4-star who commanded U.S. Central Command, that is all U.S. forces in the Middle East. We had General Chuck Wald, Air Force 4-star, who was Deputy Commander of European Command. We had Vice Admiral Truly, a former astronaut and administrator of NASA, who many of you probably know. We had Admiral Priya, who commanded the U.S. Pacific Command and went on to be our ambassador to China. And I could go on and on. We had Vice Admiral Gaffney, commanded National Defense University, etc. General Gordon Sullivan, retired Army Chief of Staff, chaired the Military Advisory Board. And as I said, my colleague Sherry Goodman was the executive director, and I led the study and writing team. So how did things work? Well, that Military Advisory Board with my study team in attendance met monthly from September 2006 up through April 2007. And we brought in climate scientists to brief. We brought in the intelligence community. General Engel briefed. We brought in business leaders. I took a bunch of the generals to hear a little bit of the contrary point of view. We went to hear Richard Lindzen when he was in Washington. That was kind of interesting. And the group then traveled to the UK, met with scientists and some very senior business and government leaders there. In fact, our first meeting was in Tony Blair's cabinet room, and one of his aides told us that he would have met with us had he been in town at the time. But the most important aspect of the study really was as follows. My study team would do some of the background work, and we stuck, of course, with what came out of IPCC. I guess it was the 4th assessment report back then, and other peer-reviewed scientific literature. And we provided that information to the group of generals and admirals. They took that aboard. They did a lot of research and calling around on their own. And then at various Military Advisory Board meetings over that winter of 06-07, many of them, not all, would in turn take what we gave them and brief the group on how they would see things playing out in their part of the world. For example, Admiral Priya, former ambassador to China, said, given these changes in China, which are being predicted, this is how I would see it playing out in terms of security. General Zinni for the Middle East, General Wald for EUCOM, et cetera, et cetera. So what did they find? And I'll go through this very, very quickly. Our findings were consistent. Well, they proceeded with General Engel and the NIC did, but they're consistent with what he said. And basically, all natural and human systems are susceptible to impacts from climate, but 4 that were particularly worrisome would be things like water supply, agricultural productivity, human health, and sea level rise and flooding, of course. So how do those things potentially affect national security, world stability and national security, according to our panel? Well, first of all, weak and failing states are going to become increasingly unstable as they're less and less able to provide the basic needs for their people. Cross-border resource conflicts could occur, and we all talk about Darfur, which we know is tribal and ethnic, but that conflict really had its roots in environmental causes and conflicts over arable land. Mass migrations could occur, both from resource shortfalls and, of course, sea level rise, and Bangladesh comes to mind there. A lot of people are already on the move, and India certainly doesn't want them. And humanitarian crises in third world areas, the developing world that is, and of course Africa comes to mind there. The U.S. military already provides a great deal of humanitarian assistance to that continent, and that's only going to increase in the future. And our board, quite frankly, debated that quite a bit. They were really aware of the potential debates where one could say, look, we'll provide aid when we could, but if it increases in the future, if we can't do any more, we won't do it. But they came to the conclusion that the political pressure to provide aid in parts of the world like that will be unbearable, and our military is going to have to take an active role, more so even than they do now. So given these and other findings, what did this Military Advisory Board recommend? 5 things, very high level. First, climate change should indeed be considered in U.S. national security planning, and beginning with the 2008 Defense Authorization Act, that has been the case. Secondly, they said we as a nation should make more of a commitment to greenhouse gas reduction. We're starting to see that now. Third thing they said was that the U.S. should engage on an international level to help build capacity in the developing and non-developed parts of the world to build resilience to these changes as they come. That is, let's avoid humanitarian disasters before we're faced with them and having to respond. Fourth, they recommended that DOD could help perhaps lead the nation, both as an example and as a test bed in, let's say, smart energy choices, helping wean the country off fossil fuels. And fifth, they recommended to the Department of Defense not to forget to look after itself in terms of things like sea level rise and other effects on installations. And I'll sum it up with one. I hate to use the word soundbite. It sounds so trite, but our Military Advisory Board really looked at this as risk. And I'll get back to what I said up front. They weren't going to engage in any debate on climate change. Now here, 3 years later, we know that debate's pretty much over, but it was still going in 2006 when they took this on. They see it as a risk thing. They talk about these huge ramifications that could occur for our nation down the road. And as prudent military planners, they say, look, throughout our careers, we've never dealt with 100% uncertainty. And for example, the soundbite from General Sullivan is military guys, we know that if we wait for 100% certainty on the battlefield, something bad has happened. We're military guys, national security planners. There's a risk that maybe all these bird-brained scientists could be right, so we as a nation better be ready. Thanks.